Hello! What's up? How was reading week? Or at least the first reading week they announced before getting all confused about why it made so many instructors so mad. We're in my living room. Why did we do this? Why? Why indeed? Why indeed? Because I can't keep kicking my husband out of the damn office every time I want to film one of these things. So let's try a different room. Recap: the elephant outside the frame. So, how was all that stuff I made you read last time? You guys okay? I know 2 readings in a film was kind of a lot, which is why I gave you 2 whole weeks to get through it. Yeah, it's a bunch of pretty tough reads, especially in a very mentally taxing era, both from a content and a form standpoint. Like, what the hell was going on with this thing? I mean, even if you look for the actual article online, it really looks like that, so I don't understand the internet sometimes. Basic takeaways from all that material should have been this. Number 1, that framing is a necessary action required to create photographs. Yes? Yes. Number 2, framing is an essentially manipulative act. Yes? Yes. Number 3, therefore, all photographs are manipulated. I didn't pass Math 1 for nothing. What did we learn in my last video? Images are not reality. This is why. Did I burn myself on that scorching hot chamomile roast when I realized this myself? Oh yes, indeed I did. Realizing this peeled away a lot of the misleading and often gatekeepy language that sometimes comes from more experienced photographers about
photographic purity and truth, and I don't edit, therefore I am a superior photographer.
Hashtag no filter is a scam. Because I don't need a filter to crop out the pores from my scenic vista of the city or to angle my body to the side to hide my bilbil. You guys didn't need filters to create light paintings. There are so many non-post-processy ways to manipulate images in camera that it makes actual post-processy ways seem almost redundant. It's almost as if there's no practical or philosophical difference between digital and photographic manipulation. Almost. I mean, have you guys seen this Photoshop 2021 neural filters thing? It turned me back into a 3-year-old, dear God. As a rule, and this is just my personal rule, I try to get everything right in camera. Especially when I'm shooting in film, because there are no do-overs. And I'd argue that this has less to do with photographic truthfulness and purity, and more to do with making sure that we have a good base image to work with once I get to printing, or once I start retouching. Now, let's hit the brakes a little bit here. This is not to say that it doesn't matter how we take our photographs. This doesn't mean that photography is an anything-goes kind of martial art. You don't have free reign to do whatever the hell you want just because
all photography is manipulated anyway, so who cares?
No, queen. We do not stand bad faith interpretations of this concept. What this does mean is that we need to be even more vigilant about photographic ethics. It means that it's so very, very easy to carelessly misrepresent a situation. Photography is cute and all, but it doesn't really care about anybody's feelings. But you, my child, creative practitioner and whole-ass human being, should. VC28, Lecture 6, The Decisive Moment. So let's talk about freezing motion. Freezing motion, while it might seem like kind of an obvious characteristic of the medium, is quite an odd feature that is unique to photography. Consider a photograph like this by God, it's either Henri Cartier-Bresson or Louis Fourier. Google is not forthcoming about whom this is credited to, but if any one of you can definitively find out for me, I will give extra point on this week's plate. Show a legitimate source. Anyway, take a look at it. Consider the figures in this photograph, their relationship to each other, and to the space. Think about what might have happened right before the shutter was released and after. Think about what cosmic conglomeration of events had to take place in order for this photograph to be possible in this precise manner. You done? Great. Now consider the same image, but let's say it was a drawing. Would it carry the same cosmic significance as the photograph did? Would it mean the same thing? Would it represent the same action by an artist? I am hoping that your answers to these questions are no, but if they aren't, I hope you let me know, because I'd be very curious to know why you think that. But my answer is no, and it's precisely because capturing a moment like this photographically and capturing it through drawing are kind of fundamentally different acts. As a drawing, it's kind of more gestural and freeform. I know the artist took the time to sit down and plan the shapes and positions and relationships of the figures and the way the guy's leg is positioned and the way this woman's skirt is flapping around. There's a greater sense of control over the elements in a drawing. In photography, there is a sense that this is kind of a one-in-a-million moment. Sure, let's not forget what we learned last lesson about everything being staged. These guys could have hopped over this puddle 80 times for all we know before they arrived at this exact, perfectly composed photograph. But that still means that this photograph is 1 out of 80 shots. That's still a pretty significant get. Old-timey French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson called this whole extravaganza of photographic theory the decisive moment. Well, actually, he called his book Image
à la sauvette,
which supposedly translates to images on the run or stolen images, and then some other dudes translated his book title into English, and then it became the decisive moment. Either way, he popularized this concept. It's a whole thing. Words are hard. I'ma let American photographic scholar Dr. John Suler define this for you.
This moment occurs when the visual and psychological elements of people in a real-life scene spontaneously and briefly come together in perfect resonance to express the essence of the situation. Some people believe that the unique purpose of photography, as compared to other visual arts, is to capture this fleeting, quintessential, and holistic instant in the flow of life. For this reason, many photographers often mention the decisive moment, or similar ideas about capturing the essence of a transitory moment when they describe their work. Now that I've proposed this...
Salamat, Master! According to Cartier-Bresson, photography was not just about placing objects in a compositionally pleasing way within a frame as you might in a still life, like we did 2 plates ago. For him, this was still too pictorialist an action. This was still carryover from a painting tradition. For him, it was more about meeting these kind of perfect moments, where everything falls into place and all the elements in your frame form these ideal compositional geometries that he believed photography was all about.
Photography is not like a painting. There is a creative fraction of a second when you are taking a picture. Your eye must see a composition or an expression that life itself offers you. You must know with intuition when to click the camera. That is a moment a photographer is creative. Zoop! The moment. Once you miss it, it is gone forever.
So, deliberately placing things in a frame, too pictorialist, waiting for a cute moment, photography, according to Cartier-Bresson. And I mean, he's not totally wrong, I think. The ability to identify and capture these moments is a uniquely photographic skill that does take patience and practice to learn to do well. Tangent here, I've been shooting weddings since 2010, and even the most experienced of photographers I've worked with will still ask a bride to do a cute thing she just did a second time because he missed it the first time. I've read that Cartier-Bresson would actually seek out these perfect geometries of composition in his street photography. I assume this means he'd lurk under a bridge or something, or behind a tree, and then wait for someone to walk into his frame to complete his shot, which I find is an interesting approach to this compositional philosophy. I mean, for me, the most obvious question about it is, why not just ask someone to walk into a puddle or jump over whatever, a fence, or to walk by exactly where you need him to. What would the actual difference be photographically? I think his sneaking around and waiting for people to complete his composition belies what he might have actually believed about the decisive moment, that it cannot be staged.
Manufactured or staged photography does not concern me. There are those who take photographs arranged beforehand and those who go out to discover the image and seize it. For me, the camera is a sketchbook, an instrument of intuition and spontaneity, the master of the instant which, in visual terms, questions and decides simultaneously. In order to give a meaning to the world, one has to feel oneself involved in what one frames through the viewfinder. This attitude requires concentration, a discipline of mind, sensitivity, in the sense of geometry. It is by great economy of means that one arrives at simplicity of expression. Photography is the simultaneous recognition in a fraction of the second of the significance of an event, as well as a precise organization of forms which give that event its proper expression.
And so, as obvious as this might sound, the decisive moment is actually a pretty hotly debated topic in nerdy photographic circles. Some people obviously agree with Cartier-Bresson. Others say that this philosophy produces work that is overwrought and too polished, and that waiting around for a perfect image is a contradiction of the supposed spontaneity and candidness of the decisive moment. I've read people say that it's an archaic notion, that it has no real bearing, especially in a post-mobile phone cam society, where everything is constantly being photographed from all angles anyway. And that photography is now mostly about editing or choosing the right image rather than capturing the right fraction of a second. Madaming thoughts ang mga photo nerds. Yes, believe me. For me, personally, I think the decisive moment represents a legitimate style of photographing. But I think taking its ideas too much to heart is what ends up producing a lot of these gatekeepy photographic purists. If you hear someone say that
The camera's singular purpose is to capture the unique geometry and quintessential purity of the decisive moment,
distrust them immediately, this is a red flag. Number one, the camera does not have a single purpose. Number two, no one person gets to decide what the perfect essence of a moment is. Rather, I'd invite you guys to consider the decisive moment in tandem with what we learned about framing. That it's just another form of in-camera photographic manipulation. Whereas with framing, we are deciding where in a space a photograph occurs. With the decisive moment, we decide where in time the photograph happens. Let's recall what Errol Morris said about Roger Fenton's war photographs. Remember the cannonballs? The cannonballs!
Is it possible to pose a photograph by excluding something? Say, for example, an elephant that's standing right at the edge of frame. If you can pose something by excluding something from an image, isn't something always excluded from every image? Yes, Fenton could have had an elephant in the Valley of the Shadow of Death. The elephant could have been walking through the frame of Fenton's camera, and Fenton waited until the elephant had just cleared frame. Or told Sparling, his assistant, get rid of that elephant. And in that event, he posed the photograph by excluding something. But how would you know? The photograph is posed not by the presence of the elephant, but by its absence. Isn't something always excluded, an elephant or something else? Isn't there always a possible elephant lurking just at the edge of frame?
Cannonballs! Just as there is an elephant outside the frame, there's also an elephant outside the decisive moment. There are many elephants in photography, honestly, and we are just constantly keeping them outside of our photographs. Sorry, elephants. Plate 5, freezing motion. It's playtime! Okay, so this week we're freezing motion. What? Yes, we are. Just submit 3 photographs, freezing motion, tag 2 of your best friends, make sure you're following this account, and that's it. Flight accomplished. You get a MacBook, you get a MacBook. Everybody gets a MacBook. Char! Yes, this is essentially the plate. But we have a few parameters to get through here. Number 1, create 3 photographs freezing motion. So here's the long and short of what this means. No motion blur. Your previous plate was all motion blur, but this one is now the total opposite. This means you're going to have to adjust your settings to make sure that this does not happen. You can prevent this. Set your shutter speed as fast as it'll go and then compensate the other settings to make sure you get an appropriate exposure. If you shoot in daylight, this should be a lot simpler. But hey, if you want to shoot at night, I challenge ya. This plate is usually a lot simpler when we aren't in quarantine, but I am pretty curious about what you guys will end up with here. I will highly discourage you guys from doing jump shots, as these are pretty corny and usually end up looking exactly the same each time. But if you can come up with a unique and interesting way to execute this, I'll allow it. Number 2, the photographs must demonstrate a sensitivity to compositional geometry in the style of Cartier-Bresson and other decisive moment practitioners. For me, this is actually the trickiest aspect of this plate. Freezing motion is just a camera operation thing. That's the easy part. But finding a way to frame it effectively in a composition, now this is challenging.
We often hear of camera angles. That is those made by a guy who throws himself flat on his stomach to obtain a certain effect or style. But the only legitimate angles that exist are those of the geometry of the composition.
For Cartier-Bresson, composition was a matter of what he called geometry. All the elements in the frame had to connect. There had to be some kind of relationship. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a physical relationship, if you know what I mean. Like, no, it's not that these elements had to connect physically, but that there needed to be some kind of tension between the elements, or that they related to each other in a way that was humorous or magical somehow. This can be done through the use of a framing device like an architectural or a natural elements, or through the interaction of moving elements. But the point here is to be intentional about where everything is in the frame, including whatever motion you're freezing. So consider these 3 images that I'm showing right now. I mean, as photographs, they're fine, right? Nothing to write home about, nothing to text your best gal pals about, except maybe this bald guy's backside. But now, look at them in the frame that their photographers actually placed them in. How's that for an elephant? So this is what I mean by compositional geometry. Not that there are perfect Pythagorean right angles in the composition, but instead that there are meaningful relationships between the subjects and the elements surrounding them. I expect you to be this deliberate in the execution of this project. Finally, these images must function as a photographic series. This is not to be confused with a diptych. A diptych is just a format, right, of placing 2 images side by side. So these don't necessarily need to function next to each other, so no need to worry about things like orientation or proportion like last time. They just need to be linked by something either aesthetic or conceptual. It's up to you to decide what works best for your plate. The idea here is that all 3 images belong to the same family. And so there needs to be an overarching idea, either like a concept or a visual, that brings them all together in the family of photos. I think that is the what on the plate. But if something isn't clear, please don't hesitate to consult with me. Don't be shy if you don't understand something. Don't be shy if you want to ask a question that feels obvious. I know I made fun of you guys last time with my Photoshop comment, but I do wish to walk that back. Even if you feel like it's a dumb question, feel free to ask me. I am happy to take all questions. Okay? Okay, let's go. Let's do this. Let's go.